Speaking of the girls then, because I think what would be really lovely is to tell us a little bit more about the person behind the leader. Is you've got two girls,
Yep.
you've got a fantastic wife, you're really passionate about how to change the future positively for future generations of leaders. Give us a little bit of a background and intro into into all of the history.
So from Australia, moved to London in my early to mid 20s. Thought I'd be doing sort of the 2-year stint, and here I am still here. Met my wife when she was an intern, and I was my first job in London at Disney. And fast forward 16, 17 years, whatever, 18 years now, whatever it is. I'm nearly approaching half my life living here in London, which I think is quite. I never thought this would be where I'd be for such a long time. So my two daughters, both born here in the UK. I've got Fenna, who's 10, who's about to start year 7, and my youngest Poppy, who's, I always get her year wrong, but she's about to start year 3. But look, I think, certainly I think becoming a parent, and I think you know this, Layla, and I think anyone listening who's a parent, it does change your perspective, and I think
completely.
I think for the first time in your life, you start thinking about, there's something more important than yourself, and sort of being a father of 2 daughters as well. Look, I was raised by a mother who had a very big, very strong career, big career, and so I always, I think that strong female person in my life is certainly, I suppose, prepared me to be a father of 2 daughters. And so I'm, very conscious that I want to obviously give them as much opportunity as anybody could have, and so, that's what I strive for, is to try and get them into a state where they can feel like they can achieve anything. I think, my oldest is, I think, approaching, turned 10, and is sort of about to enter those next 10 years, which will be, I'm sure, as a father, a challenging period. But I think my objective always is to, and this is what my wife and I always talk about, just give our daughters as much opportunity as possible. Which avenue they go down, I think it's for them to choose. But you want them to feel like they can do whatever they want. And my job, I think, as a parent, is to provide that platform. So whatever they want to do, I prepared them for that. And so that's the ambition. I think as any parent should be.
I love that. I didn't know, actually, that you had such a strong mother figure in your life. And forgive me if I'm asking too personal questions here, but obviously I've had the fortunate pleasure of interviewing you before. And as I mentioned, I was listening to our old podcast that we did when you joined me as a guest in a taxi on the way over, and I thought to myself, wow, that was a couple of years ago. Everything that's changed since then, the cultural nuances that you and your children must have learned through going from Brisbane now through here to the UK, and obviously your incredible travel across EMEA. Has that had an impact? Do you think?
I think it
impacted?
Has. Look, I think when I think I always was fascinated by other cultures. I think I've always been a bit of a history buff, and so I think growing up in Australia, a relatively new country, I suppose, compared to the rest of the world, the ancient history, the sort of the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century was always very interesting for me. So to actually go and visit a lot of these places, a lot of these countries where sort of these big events happen in history, was always something I really wanted to do. But you never think, you're going to see it as much as you end up doing. So I think it's been, for me, a really rewarding almost 20 years of my life that I got a great opportunity to see the world. Now, I think now, post-COVID, I'm very much enjoying less travel. and traveling only, for on holidays or the occasional work trip is a good balance now as a parent. But those sort of 15, 20 years where I was traveling, every other week was tough. But I think it was an amazing opportunity, amazing experience. I think making such great relationships and friends around the region, it's a real luxury. So whether I ever think about going to Beirut or to Bucharest or to Cape Town, there are good friends I've got in all of those countries that that can always help me when we're wanting to go there. So I think that was a huge real benefit to certainly my time at Yahoo in my early career, and then when I was at Shazam, I did a lot of travel as well. And I think the people you meet, the experiences you have. I suppose one of the sad ones for me now is actually Russia, because I was always very interested in Russian history, and when I was at Shazam, Russia sort of became one of the biggest markets for us. And through sort of 2016 to 2018, I spent quite a bit of time in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and it was an amazing experience. And the relationships and the people that I met, and the history that I was able to see was fascinating. I think it's really sad that it's probably going to be a long, long, long time before I'll ever be able to go back there again, which is very sad. But that's unfortunately, that's life.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, and it's amazing what happens in such a short period of time.
Yeah.
We've talked before about the political environment, geopolitical environment, and the impact on business, and certainly the modern leader needs to be someone that is able to cope with all of these different types of challenges, but also the cross-cultural pieces that are so important to understand properly. To be able to lead global communities and organizations.
I think what most, it's funny when you start doing, business across a lot of countries, I think most people would presume that, it's very different, right, from country to country. Where I've always had the position that actually when you're working and traveling and doing your work in these different countries, I would argue that actually 90% were the same, and when I was going to Moscow, I was talking to the brand manager of Pepsi, right? I was talking to the team from McDonald's, right? I was talking to some of the Russian brands there, and they're very similar conversations. They're all trying to achieve the same thing, and yes, the language is different. Yes, you've obviously got different backgrounds, but I would argue that we have a lot more in common than we don't. And so, when you're able to sort of build those relationships at the individual level, you often think to yourself, how do we screw it up so much at the geopolitical end of things? Because my experience of the individuals in Russia has been always very, very positive, and it's a real shame that's not able to sort of flow into the bigger picture, the macro view. So, I think that's for me probably the biggest, biggest surprise. But it shouldn't be, right? Because as humans, I think we have a lot more in common than we ever admit. Yes, we have different backgrounds, different perspectives, different educations, but even with that, we're still very similar. Mm-hmm.
Maybe a strange question to ask, but does it ever scare you? Because there's times for me that I think, oh my goodness, so much is happening in the world. I've had great experiences in lots of different countries, but how things are changing and what you see in the media can be terrifying, especially when you have kids.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're lucky and blessed to have a 40-month-old. You have two young girls. How do you feel about that as a parent and as a leader? Because it's like, oh my goodness, like how are we going to cope with change in the coming years?
Yeah, I think the prospect of my daughters finishing school and doing a gap year backpacking around the world does terrify me. Yes, not because I think the world is, well, it does. and I think as a parent, all you can do is sort of prepare them for that. But I think you don't have to watch the news, right, to see, and whether the news is just amplifying something that's always been there. There's probably a little bit to that. Maybe it's not quite as bad as we just see it and hear it much more now than we ever used to. But no, I think it does. I think any parent is going to be cautious about, when you've been protecting these things for 20 years and then all of a sudden they go out to the world. My mother still worries about me when I travel, all these years. So I think a parent will always do that. And it's only when you become a parent do you understand it.
Absolutely.
But yes, I think it's, I do worry that the ability to have civil conversation and disagree respectfully, I do feel that side of things is diminishing. It's kind of, we've very much pulled into our own tribes, and to be in that tribe, you've got to believe everything in that tribe, and you've got to disagree with everything in the other tribe. And I think that's a really dangerous position for us to be in a democracy, because the reality is 50% of the population generally disagree with the other 50%, and that's always been the case. But I think the ability to compromise has ensured that our form of government democracy has worked. I think when you fail if you don't believe in anything, and you look at the other side as the enemy, I think that's a real danger for democracy, that I think we all have to really consciously make an effort to bring a bit more civility back to discourse, to dialogue, because that's probably what I fear the most, actually, for my kids' future.
Indeed. It's that conscious inclusion, essentially, as well, because things seem to be so polarized, and that polarization can lead to that fear, and that fear then of speaking out, doing or saying the wrong thing. Oh my goodness, are we going to be vilified for doing or saying that? Actually, it's a curiosity. And some of the things that you were saying before, which you articulated them better than I will now, but it's almost like the human language and the similarities that we have that are the majority, and you talked about this in the last podcast actually, which was really fascinating, is it's like love, it's kindness, it's the human factors, it's a sense of humor. All of those things, they translate across borders. Yes, business may be done in different ways, and there's, we laughed last time about the cultural idiosyncratic differences of how you might negotiate, yet at the same time, so much of what we do is its commonalities and similarities, and those are the things to be celebrated.
No, I agree, and I think, I think politicians around the world need to remember that to govern and to lead, there's got to be compromise, and you've got to engage the other side. I think it's, I think it creates the wrong. I think it creates this sort of hunger for controversy. I think that often the media can fuel. I think it makes the sort of the people who are really engaged even more combative. And I think as a society, we have to take ownership at the at the individual level. I think within the media and in the business sense as well. I think we have to, as leaders, really show that compromise and listening is, part of what, as a citizen, we should all be, trying to achieve. And then I think from a political perspective, I think we have to demand our politicians, engage, right, with the other side, and have, disagree on policy. I think that's what politics should be, and that's what our leaders should be doing, is arguing politics, not arguing personality. And I think that's a real worry, and it's one of the reasons why I think how I consume media has evolved as well. I don't want to watch such personal attacks, on key topics. As a consumer now, I really want to make sure that I'm staying informed, absolutely, but to try and limit my exposure to editorialization of topics as much as possible, so I can create my own view. But then again, my view is my view, right? It's not going to be the same as everybody's, and that's fine. I think that's what that's what democracy should be. But I definitely fear that, and definitely hope that that the next generation of kids come out with that sort of perspective. And I think as parents, I think we have to make sure that we sort of put that front and center of the way we talk to our kids, the way we expose them to different things that maybe we don't agree with. I think it's important to have that dialogue with them to explain perspective, but also that they can have a different view than their parents, and that's fine as well. But I think schools, I think parents, we all and politicians need to do a better job of showing how civil discourse is fine, but you've got to do it in a respectful way.
Mm-hmm. Again, completely agree, and trying to find something that I can respectfully disagree with you on now, because I'm like, oh goodness. But talking of civil discourse, and I think both you and I can agree or respectfully disagree with the fact that diversity ought to be utilised more so as a commercial lever for economic growth and prosperity. And economic growth and prosperity appears to be the one thing that's not being argued about in the press or in government or in future government. Really important that we have that well-rounded view, and being apolitical as a CEO Activist Council is something that is key, so that we can see all of those different viewpoints, yet at the same time we can harness the power of diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity, culture, all of those rich smorgasbord of things in order to drive better, positive change for future generations. Talk to me about what CEO activism means to you, because of course we're very grateful to have you as a member of the CEO Activist Council.
Look, I think if you break down, I suppose what is a leader trying to achieve? A leader is trying to get the best team, the best group of individuals possible to advocate their particular product or service into a market. So there's two sides of that. One, there's around attracting the best. If you limit yourself to a certain group of people, you're limiting your ability to attract the best. And so I think from just a purely capitalistic view of labor, that makes no sense, right? You need to ensure that you are taking the best talent from the biggest pool possible, right? But then layer on top of that, well, if your customers again are a diverse community, then the best way to attract the most diverse and the biggest consumer pool is to make sure your messaging, your services, your products are attracted to the biggest population, the biggest group of consumers. So even from the most basic view of capitalism, to your point, it makes total sense. And so whether you believe in CEO activism, whether you believe in the politics of it, if you strip that away and just look at the pure common sense from a business perspective, leaders should be trying to attract the best talent from the biggest pool of candidates possible. And then I think that, so from a purely capitalist view, totally logical. I think then just from a human perspective, I think as leaders, it's our duty to ensure, and I talked about this a little bit earlier around, as a parent, I want to make sure my kids have the best chance of succeeding in life, and my job as a parent is to give them a platform so they can have, they can make that decision, but they can strive for whatever they want. I think as a society, I think we should be at the sort of the next level down, parent to society. It's the same thing. We want any little kid waking up, in the UK or Australia or wherever this morning to feel like if they put the hard work in, they can achieve whatever dreams they have. I don't think it's controversial to say there are a lot of kids waking up and not even knowing what potential they have, or can only see one or two avenues to having what you might want to call a successful life. And so, I think as a society, we have a challenge and a job in front of us to make sure that as many kids as possible feel like they can achieve. If they work hard, and they're committed, they can achieve anything, and there shouldn't be anything artificial blocking their roots. And so I think from a leader, and something that we can do right now is certainly we can lean in, we can make sure that our teams are achieving the first challenge of making sure that we're getting as diverse and attracting the best talent from a society, and so we can make those. We can drive that thinking in our companies right now. I think in terms of giving kids that feeling they can achieve whatever they want, that's a little bit more, right? I think that's more societal. I think that's more government. But certainly as leaders, I think we need to do our part and then put a lot of pressure on those other institutions, whether that's government, to do their part. But let's start with what we can do, and what we can do is make sure that we are making sure that our workforce represents the consumer or the audience we're wanting to target. But also, what can we do to expose younger people around the careers and that are available for them in our industry? And so, that's one thing that we're very much leaning into now. And actually just last week we welcomed our legal team. Did a session last week with a whole lot of sort of A-level students from a couple of schools across London, just to sort of say, hey, you think about tech, there are a lot of professions, whether that's HR, whether that's legal, whether that's marketing, whether that's product, whether that's sales, whether that's accounting. There are a lot of great professions in our industry, and a legal team did a great job sort of really exposing those opportunities to young students here in London. So, I think there's a lot of things we can do, but if we sort of boil it down, we really want every kid to feel like they can achieve, right? There is an avenue for them to have a successful life.
That was so beautifully said, Josh. And I think a big part of this, what I'm getting from what you said, is early intervention, and also the hearts and minds. Obviously you're a parent to two daughters, really strong mother, which is wonderful, strong wife. Well, you're in the minority actually, really, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah, I've had very strong women in my life, that's for sure, which has very much helped me to be a father of two daughters, that's for sure.
But as you say, it's how do you allow them to have, not their mind shaped, so to speak, but to allow them to have influence and positive influence from lots of different places. And, I've often thought to myself that if in the school, certainly when I was growing up, that there were, not just role models, but real models who were talking about the fact that it's great to be in tech if you're a girl, or it's brilliant to be of a certain certain culture, background, color, so on and so forth. If that happened more so in schools, early intervention would make a huge, profound difference to the career ladder and how people would end up getting to where they are and showing up ultimately in the workplace or whatever it is that they choose to do.
Look, I think if you look at my upbringing, I think if I look at my class of kids when I grew up in Australia, there might have been sort of one or two. I would say that weren't sort of white, sort of Anglo-Saxon background. I look at my, and even with that sort of lack of exposure, I sort of had a view that I wanted to see the world. I think my daughters have grown up with a completely different perspective. I mean, I would say all their class are, either Ukrainian or Russian or Chinese or, or from Qatar, or so that their exposure to, so many different cultures at such a young age, is unbelievable. And I think that's going to give them such a different perspective on life, than certainly I ever did. And it's, and for them, it's normal, right? And I think that's exciting for as a parent to see that I think they're going to look at the globe as their country rather. Yes, they've got conflicting nationalistic views, with my mother being Belgian, me being Australian, born in the UK. There's lots of different things. I think depending on who's playing the Football World Cup or different sports, they'll sort of cheer for one or the other. But I think we've encouraged them. They're born here. They should cheer for England, and they tend to. But I think their perspective on what it is to be from a country is very different to what mine is. I've lived in the UK for nearly half my life now, coming up on half my life, and I still have a very strong nationalistic pull for Australia. It's going to be interesting what my kids view is something that So that's something it's fun to watch. But look, I think the opportunity that they have just through their close friendships, being from all over the world, is quite a luxury. I think it's a luxury for them that it's going to open a huge amount of potential for them in the future.
It's such a great quote. They'll view the world as their country. That is a great expression. And it reminds me of growing up, actually. School in Hong Kong, and it wasn't until we came to the UK that we realised maybe there was a slight difference there, because we were the only Chinese children in school. But the fact that your kids have the opportunity to mix with so many different cultures and they view things in this way now will be absolutely fascinating. And you keeping them in touch with their different heritages, from Australia to the UK to Belgium. There's so many different layers there.
There is, and I think when I think they they love both sides of it equally. I think they're very proud to have been born in Chelsea, and they cheer for Chelsea Football Club. And that was sort of just natural, because I'm not a Chelsea fan, so that was sort of a natural thing. But they now watch a lot of their cartoons and stuff in Flemish. They don't really speak Dutch at all, but they're getting exposed to that language, which I think is important, because obviously for my wife, that's her language. But they love going to Australia, and they love the animals, and they both sponsor different wildlife. And one of my daughters sponsors a penguin, and the other one sponsors a koala. So they have. I think their mind is open to taking the best bits of all the cultures they're exposed to, whether that's here in the UK and Australia and Belgium. They take the best of all those three countries, and I created this sort of this interesting position on who they feel represents them. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works. And we've got friends living in London who are in the same position. We've got a few friends, both sort of Italian, and but their kids have been born and raised in the UK, and it's going to be interesting to see how. I think Italian, like Australians, are very proud of where they're from. So it's going to be interesting to see how their kids turn out as well. Sort of growing up outside of the countries of their parents' birth.
Totally relates. We're having the same debate at the moment, is do we teach Peter Mandarin? And I said to Costa, my husband, that I would love to learn at the same time, because I don't speak any Chinese, and so at least I can learn baby steps the same
it's a good idea,
as Peter, so that they experience all of the different richnesses of the different cultures.
Look, I think if I could critique myself, I was never great at learning languages. I'm happy to admit that. I remember my year 8 Japanese teacher, I think, said to my mother, I don't think languages are for him. Whereas my sister, she's fluent in Japanese, and she lived in Japan for 6 years. So, and my wife is obviously fluent in English and Dutch and French, and understands German and Spanish. So, I look at them and think, wow, I wish I could, I wish I could have done that. But and actually, it's probably one of the reasons why my kids don't speak Dutch, is because I think in a house where both parents speak another language, then it's very natural for the kids, because they can speak that language at home, and the kids will develop that second language. Whereas because I don't speak a word of Dutch apart from happy birthday and how to say a few swear words, the home, we're not speaking Dutch. And so I think my wife, I think that's a big sacrifice for my wife, because I think she would love her kids to be able to speak her language. And so, that's why I think now watching the kids watch a lot of their TV in Flemish to try and develop that now is something that it's a good idea.
Maybe
but I think you should definitely do that.
At the same time.
Old dog new tricks is tough.
I feel the same, but you because they're young right now. Or at least this is, these are some of the decisions that we're going through trying to make at the moment. I'm like, oh my goodness, but it's so hard. I once tried to learn Mandarin.
Yeah, it's tough.
It's like 7 tones.
It's tough.
And I just couldn't.
Japanese, I think, and Mandarin, I think, are equally different alphabets, different, right? They're tough languages to learn. I mean, I lived in Switzerland for 3 years. In the French-speaking part of Switzerland, and I think by the end of it, I could order pizza online, and that was and order, at the local boulangerie. But that was about the limit of my French after living there for 3 years. So.
Again, very much the same. I think I can order a chocolate croissant, perhaps. I can say what I would like. I just come back from Hong Kong and, could pretty much say ngoile as a thank you in the taxi, and gazed at people when they'd speak to me in Cantonese, which, you kind of think, oh my goodness, you're kind of different cultures, different borders. But ultimately, the language of humanity, kindness, love, all of those kind of great things. Actually, that's what's really, really important.
I think as an English first speaker, I think you can become very lazy, and particularly in my industry as well. I've traveled to 50, 60 countries now in my job, and everyone speaks English, so you get away with it. There's some tough countries, but you can get away with it. Whereas I think if you've come from another language, I think you naturally are going to learn English. So. That's my one critique. Well, I've got many critiques of myself, but that's my biggest one. I wish I spoke more than one language.
It's never too late, and you're not an old dog, Josh. However, I will say, whilst we're talking about personal career and life and things like this, that there's a perception that CEOs, leaders, entrepreneurs, kind of, they've got it all. It's easy. You got to the top, happy days. Lots of great things come to you. But I think possibly you, and certainly I, know that it can be an overwhelmingly lonely place to be. And I wonder who's been an activist in your life, who's shone a light in dark places, if there have ever been dark places on the journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think, I've been lucky to have, a really strong foundation in terms of growing up and having, great examples, whether that's my mother, whether that's my sister as well, my older sister. I think I was very, very protected for many years. And I think that gave me a great foundation. I think in terms of, my career, I think I've worked for some. Look, I think every person I've ever worked for, I've learned from. The good, the bad is equally as important. And so I think my mother tells a story when she used to teach swimming, and she used to bring me along when I was a little boy before I was swimming, I think when I became 2 or 3. They teach you early in Australia to swim. When I was first put in, I just started swimming. And sort of my mother tells a story that, I used to just watch, and I learned a lot from just watching. And I think that's true. I think whether that's learning to drive a car, first time I got in a car, I'd watched it so much, I knew how to do it. And I think that same watching other people who can do it better than you is something that I really pay a lot of attention to. So I think I've done that in my career too. I've watched the good leaders, seen what they've done, tried to, sort of unpack what they're doing and see how I can apply that from my own perspective. But I think it's been a big part of certainly my career. So, I've been very, very lucky to have also worked for some really great bosses as well, who were very supportive of me in my career. So I think that's really helped me get to here. And I think, Look, I think for any leader, you definitely need those sounding boards. And, you know, I've been lucky, and certainly my time here at Yahoo, to have some really good peers. You know, whether it's Paul, who used to run Asia Pacific, John Finney, who ran Canada and Latin America. You know, Simon Halstead, who used to be here as well, and Cree, who brought me over actually to Yahoo. You know, I've had great relationships with all those folks, and I think that's really helped me during those challenging times, because you're going to have them, to sort of sit down and, you know, run ideas by, get their perspective. I think has been really, really important. And I think any leader who doesn't have that group of people, that, you know, whether it can be people in your company, generally has to be peers or more senior people, because you know, rule one of leadership is you don't whinge down, right? You know, I think it's important that as a leader that you really do that leading. But everyone needs those people that they can confide to, go to for advice, use as a sounding board. And I've been very lucky to have those people along the way. Just when, you know, you're not quite sure what you should do here, and maybe you've got 2 or 3 ideas, but it's good to get that experience back. So I've been very, very lucky to have that group of people that I can. So, and look, I you know, when I talk to my own teams, I encourage that same thing. You know, I think self-awareness for me is probably the most important part of any leader's ability to succeed, because how you lead is all about not the message you're portraying, but how it's being consumed by your team, right? It doesn't matter how you say it, because if they're hearing it differently, it's not going to have the impact that you want. And so maintaining that high level of self-awareness is, I think, so important. I think when I first sort of started to run teams in my career, I didn't really have that self-awareness. And I kind of felt like everyone was like me, right? And what motivates me, what gets me, you know, is the same for my team. And I had very low self-awareness. And, you know, it's something that I really had to work on. I think people naturally shy away from it because they feel like it's like self-criticism or criticism. But the way that I look at it is criticism is just better, is the ways to improve things. You're not doing that well. And so knowing the areas you need to improve is really important as a leader, because if you're not big enough to say, actually, that area, I'm not doing very well and I need to focus on it, you're not fooling anybody. And so I think maintaining that self-awareness is really important. But again, through sounding boards, through good confidence, they'll also give you that feedback as well, and you need to be big enough to be able to take it. So yes, I've been very blessed to have strong leaders, you know, in my life.
It's superb advice, because it can be such a lonely place, and having the peer set internally, but also the peer set externally, those that you are almost jogging to keep up with, is how it sounds like you've really broken through those next steps and stages of learnings.
Yeah.
You know, I've often found it myself. It's like, oh my goodness, this feels so uncomfortable. I don't know what I'm going to do next. However, the watching and the learning and the looking at people that you aspire to be like, and unpacking almost, as you were explaining, how they do what they do, helps.
I think also sometimes leaders feel like they have to have all the answers. And look, we can fall into that trap of, we need to move fast, so I'm going to tell people how I want it done. And so this is an area that I'm trying to improve in myself, is actually you've got some really smart people that work for you, right? Acknowledge that you don't know all the answers, and taking their viewpoints and saying, okay, no, you're right, let's do it that way. I think every leader probably should do a better job of that. I think we all can, you know, take a lesson from that. You've hired great people. You've got probably most of the answers in front of you. Sometimes you just need to shut up and listen. And that's an area that, you know, I still need to work on for myself. Listen.
I think you're a great listener. And talking of listening and the whys of joining a peer group, which ultimately is what we've created, the embryonic CEO, well, it's not so embryonic now. I've got a whole number of CEOs who have joined, which is really exciting, 40 plus, which is wonderful. Why, without sounding too over-promotional here, why should other CEOs and leaders join the CEO Activist Council?
Well, look, I think the networking is a huge part of that because, I think having that peer set, they're having the same challenges as you are. And so actually having that community of leaders is hugely valuable. I think we all are dealing with very similar issues right now. And I think as, any leader, you should be trying to get as broad perspective on the challenges that you have, which just happen to be the same challenges most of the other CEOs have as well. So I think to create that community of leaders here in the UK, I think is really, really valuable. I think that it's also rallying around, a really important topic, I think is even more important as well. And so, even, when we went to Downing Street a few months ago, just to see the breadth and the depth in different industries at that one table, really advocating different perspectives, but all pushing for the same, trying to achieve the same thing. And so certainly I think as a leader, it's inspirational actually to hear some of the other stories and CEOs. Also too, I think it realizes, okay, maybe you're actually a little bit behind and you need to push a little bit harder. But I think having that network of like-minded people all having that same sort of challenge, for me is really, really important because it does inspire me. I think there are some, very, very successful leaders that you be able to bring together. And, I think for me, at least from a leadership perspective, I'm relatively young in that side of things. But to hear for some of those people who've been leaders for 20, 30, 40 years, maybe 40 years might be a stretch. I think there's some there 20, 30 years, it's been really inspirational to me. So, I love attending, your events because I feel like I come away with a real fresh perspective and a real enthusiasm to do things differently. So that, for me, that's why it's been, I think, hugely valuable.
Josh, that makes me so happy, and I know it makes the team so happy. And final question before we wrap up, and I have probably asked you this before, but I'd be really curious to know whether things have changed. What would you say has been or is your secret to success?
Great question, Layla. I think, look, I always felt like, it's funny. I was telling you the story about having the students here in the office last week, and most of them arrived on time. But there was a group of them who were a good 20, 30 minutes late. And so when I was doing my welcome speech to them, I sort of pointed out, really and truly, most of us have the same sort of level of intellect and IQ. But actually what sets people apart is the energy, the dedication, the caring about their job. And I've always found those people who really care, that they're passionate about what they do, they're passionate about their clients and their customers, and they really care. They're generally the people that achieve great things. Because I think, yes, work-life balance is important. Yes, going home and disconnecting is important. But really caring about the company you work for, the team that you're part of, I think is the big difference between those people who coast and those people who really succeed. And so my message to that young group was, you should always be on time, because that sets the, I think it sets the mood of the day. It sets the mood of the meeting. It sets the mood of the relationship that you create with the person you're meeting, and caring, right? I think if you can do those things, your bosses, your companies will value you. When you're valued by your company, you're going to do well. And so I think that's what I've always tried to do. I may not be the smartest. I may not work as hard as long as others, but I certainly, when I was younger, I think I did. But I really care. I really care about the people. I care about the company. I care about my job. And I think if you can do that, then you have a pretty good chance of being successful.
Josh, thank you so much. It has been like, I always love having conversations with you, and I always come away from them feeling a bit lighter, actually. So
Thank you,
it's almost like it must be like therapy. But what I'm hearing and my little summary in my mind as you were talking there was, you know, to an extent, the harder you work, the luckier you get. Really caring about people and, frankly, being in a leadership CEO role, this growing pool of needs of stakeholders, shareholders is becoming more complex, and the visibility of leaders is far more now than it ever has been. But really being able to open up, share some of the vulnerabilities, but also enjoy the successes together, to celebrate the similarities, to your point around all the different cultural borders that we work within business, but also the early intervention, you know, as well, because we are a lot of things to a lot of people. You know, a father, a son, a husband, a boss, a colleague. The list goes on, and so having the peer group and being able to canter along with others that you're aspiring to be with, you know, with an open mindset, all incredibly important. But thank you so much. It's you know, it's really been just so great having you here, and it's wonderful to have you as a part of our CEO Activist Council and on our show again. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be with you again, second time.